Commission meeting to order on Tuesday. Oh my goodness, help me. September 17th in the council chambers. Call to order, roll call.
Thank you. Before I take roll, I do want to apologize to members of the public for the meeting that ran over and my trying to get myself organized here, but thanks for your patience. Mr. Piles? Mr. Frederick?
Here.
Mr. Bernardi?
Here.
Mr. Caprillion?
Here.
Councilmember O'Reilly?
Here.
Mayor T-Strake?
Here.
And we still do not have Kathleen. Are you there, Kathleen? Kathleen is not here, but we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And okay, perfect, thank you. Approval of agenda. Kim and John.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of minutes, August 20th, 2024 meeting.
Make that motion.
Kim
Yep.
and John. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Identify potential conflicts of interest. Please be advised per City Policy 3.340 that any member of this body shall declare a conflict if they have an interest, financial or otherwise direct or indirect, or engage in a business or transaction or professional activity, or incur an obligation of any nature that is in conflict with the proper discharge of the body's official duties. Any conflicts of interest with the Plan Commission? Seeing none, on to item 6, citizen comment. Is there any citizen comment this evening? Citizen comment twice? Citizen comment 3 times? Seeing no citizen comment, we'll move on to item number 7. Conditional use permit request by Janice Moan to consider allowing a community living arrangement facility, 1-2 beds, with exceptions to the following section 18.5711A, requiring community living arrangements to be separated by at least 2,000 feet, section 18.5711B, which requires the population of all community living arrangements in the city to not exceed 1% of the city's and aldermanic district population, and section 18.5711D, requiring each facility to have rear and side yard, which is visibly screened from the abutting residential properties. The subject property is located at 716 North Juneau Avenue, partial 33-07187, zoned TR-6, 2-family residential. Presenter, Bryce Hembrook, planner.
Mayor, I'm sorry for making you read all of that. Can you see is the slide on the screen?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Perfect. So I'm going to do this presentation a little bit differently than how we normally do. I'm going to just kind of show where the subject property is, kind of explain at a high level, and then I will have the applicant kind of explain the purpose for going for this request and her conversations with the state as to why they considered it to be, I believe, an adult family home, or as we consider it, a community living arrangement. So to begin with, the subject property is located on North Juneau Avenue. It's 716, so it is on the north side of this building. So the way that our zoning code is set up, there's not really a great definition for what type of residence this is. It is a 2-family dwelling, but it's essentially a condo unit. So the applicant would, own the northern portion of the building, but it's essentially a 2-family unit, basically a 2-family building on the total condo, the total lot itself. So it's a little bit different than your typical subject property for these CLAs, the community living arrangements. So I just kind of want to go over that. But this is Becker Road, Becker Road. So it's kind of near the high school, just for a general sense of where we're talking about here. And then, as I mentioned, it is a condo. So there is, on the screen, it kind of shows the separate, the layout. So this kind of shows the floor plan of what to expect at the house. So before I get into too much of the other information, I would ask Janice, the applicant, to go up to the podium and kind of explain what she's looking to do in terms of how she looks to provide to Tammy, and kind of what the DHS required from her. And then after that, I'll kind of give my information based on, the zoning code and comp plan. And then from there, we would have the public hearing. So Janice, if you could go up to the podium, that would be great.
And could you start by just giving your name and your address?
And then there's a little button on the microphone down. There's a little circle on the bottom on the table.
Lower left.
Thanks, Tom. Yep.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Technology is not my forte.
Me neither.
First, Janice Moen, 716 North Juneau. First, I'd like to thank each of you for your time in trying to gain some understanding regarding the conditional use permit that I am seeking. I know there have been some concerns and questions regarding a business. The conditional use permit I am seeking is not a business, as I am only seeking to be certified as an adult family home with one specific individual named Tammy, who previously lived with me for 38 years. Wisconsin Department of Health Services requires certification because Tammy is not related to my daughter and me. Furthermore, the city rules require a conditional use permit for an adult family home certification. So my request is unique in the fact that I am only seeking this certification to bring Tammy back into my home and care, and will not be opening my home to any other individuals. Prior to my retirement, I was certified for 46 years as a medical adult adult home, serving children and adults who are medically and cognitive fragile, and Tammy lived with us since she was age 10. At age 9, she suffered from Rye syndrome and was brought into the medical foster care program here in Marshfield through Wood County. From that moment on, she lived with my family and became part of our family. She will turn 50 years old in February, but still looks like a teen, and don't we all wish we looked like that? Over 7 years ago, I bought a totally accessible home in Mosinee. However, prior to that, we were located in Marshfield that entire years before that, or since 1977. I retired and relocated back to Marshfield with my daughter, Autumn. I would like to bring Tammy back into my home, as she seems to be struggling and physically declining while staying in an adult family corporate home that she currently lives in. Tammy is used to inclusion. And what I mean by that is, when she previously lived with me, she spent each day involved in some way attending or volunteering at community events and being out and about with assistance. She is a participant of My Team Triumph, a running group inclusive of individuals that are differently abled. With this team, she competes in the Wausau Marathon and other races throughout the state. Tammy also is involved with competitive cheer with the University of Stevens Point cheer squad. Previously, she was involved in Special Olympics, and I plan to reintroduce her to Marshfield area Special Olympics. Inclusion and community involvement are detrimental to Tammy's well-being, and unfortunately that has declined over the past year. Because of this limited involvement in the community, lack of inclusion, and her declining health, her father, who is her guardian, has requested that she return to live with me. Yes, Tammy has physical disabilities. She only can walk with total upper body assistance and exclusively uses a non-motorized wheelchair for transportation. She cannot eat on her own. Tammy communicates with her feet and has an expressive personality, which can be seen by the smile on her face. In speaking with neighbors, one concern that was raised was regarding traffic, staff, and parking. In relation to the conditional use permit and the adult family home, there will be no additional staff added to my home. Due to my daughter's personal care needs, I have friends and staff who come in and assist with her 24-hour care needs. These current individuals will also assist with Tammy's needs as needed. This means that myself and periodically one other individual will frequent my home for the needs of Autumn and Tammy. Being involved in the community is important to me and my daughter. We have gained many friendships through that involvement. Therefore, we do enjoy opening our home up to friends for game and card nights and social gatherings. Our driveway is able to hold 4 cars. These cars are unrelated to Tammy or the conditional use permit. I have and will continue to follow all the rules that city and state require of me. And the only thing that I ask right now is that I can bring Tammy home to where she belongs.
Thank you, Janice.
Any questions? Because I'll gladly answer them. It is a unique situation.
Janice, what I'll do is I'll continue my analysis of this. We'll probably open it up to the public hearing, and then after that, there's discussion from the Plan Commission, and I think that's where it might be appropriate for them to ask questions. So with that, I will continue with the analysis. So we got the application for this conditional use permit. And at first I was kind of not understanding exactly why it was considered a community living arrangement. Because it seemed like she was just gonna have to live with, or it seemed like Janice was gonna have Tammy live with her. But after, the DHS, after they decided that she needed to, or that she was considered adult family home and needed to be certified for that, looking at our zoning code, that falls under community living arrangement, a CLA, as I call it. And so CLAs are allowed in the TR6 district as well as all of the residential districts as a conditional use permit. And there are a number of different regulations that apply, and I included some of those in the staff report. And essentially with how Marshfield is set up, almost every single community living arrangement that is requested in the city requires a CUP, because there is a restriction on no community living arrangement shall be established within 2,000 feet of another such facility, regardless of its capacity. In this case, there is one other CLA, I believe it's within probably 1,000 feet or so. Yeah, it is within 1,000 feet. The applicant shall also demonstrate that the total capacity of all community living arrangements of all capacities in the city shall not exceed 1% of the city's population or 1% of the aldermanic district's population. So with the city's population, we're pretty limited on that 1% number, and we're well over that, mainly because Marshfield is a medical community, and so there is definitely a need for allowing for medical care in neighborhoods. And the whole purpose for CBRF is essentially to provide housing in a residential setting for those that, cannot necessarily live by themselves, whether it's, a group, CBRF, a community-based residential facility, whatever the situation is. Well, with Marshfield being the medical center that it is, it makes it, there's a lot of CBRFs throughout the town, CBRFs and adult family homes throughout the city. So this requirement is pretty much what triggers all CLAs to be reviewed. The other one that I wrote was each facility shall have a rear and side yard which is visually screened from abutting residential properties unless such facility is contained in a single family dwelling. I included this to point out as well, because as I mentioned, it's not quite clear on if it's a single family attached in terms of it's a condo, but it's also kind of similar to a twin home, which is like a 2-family residential. So I kind of looked at it as a single family attached and recommended that this exception can be granted. However, that would be up to the Plan Commission to determine. So the staff report kind of goes into a good amount of the detail, but based on what the applicant had provided me, it didn't seem like this is your typical CLA. A lot of times a community living arrangement will have, 4 or more beds. There's generally, at least one staff. So parking is a little bit more of a concern. And obviously as there's more residents, it kind of questions the feel of the neighborhood. In this case, it is one individual who, has lived with the applicant before. And it's a little bit different, I think, than almost every single CLA that I've reviewed in the past. And then in terms of staff and parking, they would meet the staffing requirements. But I just wanted to kind of touch on some of the recommendations in the comprehensive plan. So one of the comprehensive plan goals is to monitor the need for additional programs and housing options. The plan establishes the following housing policy for the assisted living sector, which is to continue to consider special needs housing such as community-based residential facilities or CBRFs based on the community need, impact on neighborhood, physical design, and the availability of existing facilities. We also did note that in terms of the neighborhood, essentially allowing the applicant to take care of one individual in the personal residence will not adversely impact the character of the neighborhood or negatively impact traffic or public safety. Once again, if there were 4 or more beds, I think that's when it starts to become more of a concern, but one one person who I don't believe is able to drive will have, arguably less of an impact than, someone that has two teenage kids, when their friends come over. That seems to have kind of more of an impact than what this would. So, and then in terms of services, there wouldn't necessarily be any need for additional services or utilities. So one of the things that was a concern, it seemed from or that I would perceive to be, a concern is that, there's a business coming in, and what if there's going to be 2, 3, 4 more beds? And so one of the ways that we can try to address that from the Plan Commission perspective is to put a certain condition on it that would limit them to only one bed, which is intended for a non-blood related individual. And then we can also place a condition. All CUPs go void after 12 months of inactivity, and in this case, this could be the same of if 12 months goes and there's no one living with the applicant, this conditional use permit can go void. And any expansion into more than one bed would have to go back through the Plan Commission and Common Council for a conditional use permit amendment. And so neighbors would be notified. So in terms of how I viewed this as just the one bed, allowing it as someone who has, lived with her before. And I see this as arguably not that much different than a normal single family residence because of the nature of the CLA. But I think with adding these conditions, this can kind of help alleviate any concerns of it becoming a bigger operation in the future. And as the applicant had informed me when I talked with her earlier, I think last week, she has no desire to expand. It would just be to help out Tammy in this time of need and to go through the proper steps according to the Department of Health Services. So with that, the recommendation would be to approve the request with the following conditions/exceptions. Number one, this conditional use permit shall expire if the proper license or certification to establish a one-bedroom facility is not obtained within 12 months of Common Council approval, or if the license is not maintained for a period of 12 or more consecutive months. Number two, this facility is permitted in exception to the 2,000-foot separation requirement and may also exceed the 1% population requirement. Number three, screening is not required alongside or rear yards. Number four, only one bed intended for a non-blood related individual is permitted for this community living arrangement. Number five, minor site changes may be administratively approved as long as the changes do not result in the property becoming non-compliant with this conditional use permit and other code requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. And before we open up for a public hearing, Steve has something that he'd like to address from the city attorney.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Well, earlier today, we received an email from Jeremy Schleckman. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it, Ms. Scheckelman. His email included as an attachment a copy of the applicable condo agreement for this development with certain portions of the agreement yellow highlighted. I just placed, as this meeting was starting, and again, I apologize for how this all quickly unfolded, a copy of his email and the condo agreement on your desk, commission members, moments ago. After getting the email earlier this afternoon, I did forward it to the city attorney looking for his review and comment. We were not able to connect today. I just talked to him moments before. That was part of the delay in starting this meeting shortly after 7 o'clock. This is what he said. He said that he didn't have a lot of time to look at it, but his opinion was as follows. The condo agreement itself should not have any impact on the Plan Commission decision on this. That's a private document. If the people who live in that condo development have cause for action because one or more elements of the agreement that they've all signed are found to be violated, that would require private action with the condo association. He did say, however, that if the commission wishes to recommend approval of the CUP ultimately, that he certainly could, between now and the council ratification of that, take a deeper dive, look at any issues that are raised or are pending to see if there's any other legal concerns with this request.
Thank you. And public hearing is now open, and we're welcome to any comments. You want to step up to the podium and state your name and address?
Hello, Jeremy Scheckelman. I live at 714 North Juneau. purchased this residence in March of 2012. Mrs. Moan will be the third neighbor that I've had since purchasing this unit. Everything has been fine through the condo agreement with the first two residences. And then we've come to this. This was not discussed with me. It seems to have been discussed with neighbors prior to coming to council. We do have some agreements or some notes in there. A few is like the declaration section 4.2, which defines it, a unit as that is part of the building intended for independent private residential use. This permit would technically turn it into a business and go against that agreement. There's also an insurance aspect to this. Due to the shared driveway, there's an increased risk, and we're currently priced for residential. This will change it to business, which is also noted in the agreement. This is going to cause an increase in premium and possible cancellation due to business and residential. In closing, I believe Mrs. Moan should have been looking more so for a single family home to conduct this business. I think this was kind of in the plan when she had moved back, and I hope the condo agreement keeps that from, or prevents that from happening.
Any questions, Mr. Shekelman?
Can I just ask one?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what I was trying to articulate earlier is that the plan commission has to make a decision based upon the things that they are responsible for in terms of determining whether a conditional use permit is warranted or acceptable. But the other part about the condo association and the agreement, do you have an association or somebody in charge who would enforce potentially the rules of the condo association? Is there something like that in place?
From my understanding, it's Fran Lang. Yes, he was the original builder, and everything is still through him.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you. Any other comments for public
I
hearing?
have a question.
Yes, sir.
I didn't understand that last part. I couldn't hear it right. But the condo association, could you tell me that? I'm sorry, I just didn't understand it.
You mean the single family home?
No, in response to Steve's question.
Okay, so there was a condo association. Fran Lang originally built these, and I believe his mother lived there, and they built most of the condos in the area. I have neighbors here too that also live under that same agreement.
Does your condo association have meetings?
I have not had one, no.
So there are no minutes, no meetings for this condo association, which came into existence
Well,
when the buildings were built?
Correct. I have not been part of a meeting for that.
Have there been any other issues at the condo association well, you've not had any meetings, so I guess the answer to that is no. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
I just didn't quite hear you.
Sure.
Alderman Weigel? I mean, Riley. Excuse me. It's been a long time.
Thank you. I guess my input on this is, much like Steve said, I don't believe it's our purview to enforce civil issues. This may very well be the legal document that will stop it, but I don't think we can consider this for the purpose of this body. I think that has to be dealt with differently, and I guess I'm comfortable with moving forward with it with a review from Attorney Wolfgram before it gets finalized at council. But my assumption at this point is that that's probably going to be the case, and this would have to be handled in a civil manner rather than us. We could actually, I think, get in trouble taking into consideration a legal document for the purposes of what we're doing. So while I do understand the situation, and you very well may have a good case there, I don't think we're in the right place to enforce that aspect of it. So that's just my input.
Yes,
And one quick question. Are we still in the public hearing session?
Yes, we
portion
are.
of the session?
yes, we are.
Okay, just want to clarify. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, John, go ahead.
I was going to make a motion to accept that recommendation. But I think we need to close the public hearing.
Right, yep, we have to close, yep. Any other comments in the public hearing, which is still open? Yes, please come up to the podium. Thank you.
I guess that I just want to make the comment that it really isn't about a business, it's about an individual who has been a part of my family. And so I was told by a realtor in town to get a realtor attorney to look at the condo agreement. And I just got it on Friday. And so that's why it hasn't been given to anybody else, but besides Jeremy last night, was that the single family, he looked at it and there's a citing, and I can give you a copy of it, Cowley versus somebody. Anyway, it was a Wisconsin big thing because it was a CBRF against a neighborhood, a CBRF of 8. And he said that if it went, I can give this to you, but I do have that. The thing about versus Cowley, and that they have the right to be in a home type situation. And a single family does not mean blood. It means people sharing a kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. And I will tell you, there will never be 4 in that home because it's only a 3-bedroom home, and the state requires everyone to have their own private bedroom. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And I want to address that quickly, and then Bryce, stand by because I may turn it over to you in a second, but just trying to clarify the issues again one more time for everybody in the room. Again, if the covenants are potentially being violated, that's a private action that you would have to take in order to enforce the covenants that you signed on to in your agreement. This body may still say yes, they may still say no, but it's going to be based upon the state law and what goes into whether or not they issue these. They get into things like noise and parking and traffic and other things, and whether or not it's appropriate to grant said permit. But the other action is always available to you to look at privately if you feel aggrieved. Am I on the right track, Bryce?
That sounds correct.
Yeah, and there's, in other words, the person applying for this permit is eligible under our code and I mean, for making the application that they've made. So it really does come down to the normal, basically the normal criteria that we look at for CUPs.
Yeah, and ultimately, one thing to consider too is when we have these conditional use permit requests, this is also assuming that all other federal, states, other local requirements, licensing, that those are all taken care of separately too. So we don't necessarily go through and say everything that's been approved, but what can be approved by Plan Commission for the zoning code. And so, that's definitely something to consider. Is this is focused on, should this conditional use permit be approved based on the zoning code and based on the recommendations in the comp plan, and that the condo agreement would be a separate matter as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so basically, Jeremy, I'm just trying to make sure that you understand. I'm not trying to minimize the questions and concerns you're raising, just trying to separate the two elements of what's going on.
Anyone else comments from public hearing? Seeing none, the public hearing is closed. And now, John, we need a motion.
Move to accept staff recommendation.
Second.
Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, we'll do a verbal vote.
Yeah, and I will add one more time, I will run this by the city attorney. He's already got it. And if he flags anything else, we can look at it before council final approval on Tuesday night next week.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Okay, Mr. Piles.
Oh, no, I seconded the motion.
Yeah, we're voting.
Right, now we're up to voting.
Yeah, we're voting by person.
Oh.
Yep.
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Frederick?
Yes.
Mr. Bernardi?
Yes.
Mr. Caprillion?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Reilly?
Yes.
Mayor T-Strake?
Yes,
Motion is approved. Thank you.
thank you very much. Discussion on principal building height requirements presented Bryce Hambrick, planner.
Thank you. Forgot I was on mute. So at the last meeting, I believe it was the last meeting, I believe Commission Member Franklin Piles brought up that he wanted to find out some more information on building building height requirements in the zoning code. And so I took this as meaning principal structure, not accessory structure. So most of this analysis will be based on the principal structure. So in the staff report, I provided some information in a table, which I'll show in a second, kind of breaking it down by the zoning districts. But to first kind of start the conversation, the building height definition in the zoning code is the vertical distance from the highest grade level at the front wall of the building to the highest point of the roof. And then generally the regulations for the building height are found in Article 2, which is the zoning district section, sections 1825 through 1843. And actually the next item that we'll be talking about, I gave an example of the SR6 table. So if you want to take a look at how that, looks in each section, you can go to I think it's probably the last page or so. Or I guess I didn't include that. I will show it later. Never mind. But here is a breakdown of the different building heights for the different zoning districts. So to kind of give you a kind of a high level explanation of the different zoning districts. So a lot of the city is zoned for single family residential. So that's more of your yellow colors, your dark yellow, your brown would be multifamily. And then the paint colors would be like the community mixed use. So this is where, Target, Walmart, Forward Bank, the mall, these are generally in the CMU district. And then there is the gray, the dark gray is general industrial and light industrial. So just to kind of give you a sense of where we're looking at for some of these zoning districts, this is not an up-to-date map, but just wanted to kind of show you kind of what these random acronyms mean. So SR2 through SR6 is a single family. And then TR6 and MR12 essentially have kind of the same height requirements of 35 feet. That seems to be standard. In my time at the city, I have not really had any single family homes that were proposed to go over 35 or, haven't really had any negative comments from builders or developers with this 35 foot requirement. It seems pretty standard in a lot of other communities as well. Where it does deviate is the MR24 district, which is our, highest density multifamily residential. So one example I use is if you were to take, for example, and it's probably taller than 100 feet, but if you take the old city hall and you were to convert it into multifamily residential, that could be an example of, the MR24 would kind of fit that site, or that would remain as downtown mixed use, which is also 100 feet. So these are in more of your dense areas of the city. And then the 35 feet are generally kind of more towards the outskirts or in the single family residential areas. We also do have the neighborhood mixed use and the UMU, which are kind of dispersed throughout neighborhoods / like main corridors. I guess not main corridors like Peach, like McMillan, et cetera, where there's kind of a feel of residential, but also commercial. And so those are still at 35. But then when you look at the CMU, that is 60, and that was amended, I believe, back in 2016, 2017. It went from, I think, 35 or 50 to 60 feet. And so, as I mentioned, the CMU district is kind of where we see most of our newer commercial developments being constructed, generally more on the north side, northwest side. For example, the new Quick Trip is CMU, and then down in the Mill Creek Business Park. Just to kind of give you a general idea of where you would see those buildings. And then the industrial park and the light industrial are 50, and then the general industrial would be 100, research and development 50. So we do have quite the variety of different height requirements, and generally residential and non-residential are the same or close, as you see here in the RH35. Where it does differ is we do have campus development and plan development throughout our city. And so that would be established through that specific campus master plan or that plan unit development. So for example, here we have the Marshfield Medical Center. That is a campus development district, so they get to set their height based on what the Plan Commission and Common Council approved. I do not recall offhand, as an example, what that height is. But then, for example, the airport is also a campus development district, so we might limit, you know, the hangar height, et cetera, which that is regulated by federal regulations as well. So we're not, the Plan Commission probably wouldn't weigh in as much on that, but I just kind of want to go over that because there are exceptions for, you know, that can be granted if they are a plan unit development or a campus development. Also, I included in the staff report a list of exceptions to the maximum height regulations. I'm not going to go through them all. However, there are a couple things that kind of stand out if there's, you know, spires or penthouses, domes that aren't intended for human occupancy, you know, mechanical rooms up on the top, skylights, flagpoles, et cetera. Those would be able to exceed the typical requirement. There are also height extensions for certain public buildings and institutions. And then number 4, the Plan Commission is able to grant exceptions to the height limitations for any building or structure not otherwise accounted for in the section, or may set the maximum height of a structure on an individual lot as a conditional use and may set special requirements as part of the overall approval under the terms and conditions of the chapter. The one thing to note is that such features, however, shall be erected only to such height as to be as necessary to accomplish the purpose that they are to serve and subject to the Wisconsin State Building Code. So the Plan Commission and ultimately the Common Council do have the ability to grant exceptions. However, that is only in rare cases where there is a substantial need for that exception. Another thing to note is that there is an airport overlay and height limitation zoning map. So I don't necessarily need to go into too much detail, but depending on where a property is in the city, they may be limited on the height that they can go. So if you're closer to the airport, depending on what the building elevation is, you might be limited on your height that might be less than the typical required, let's say 50 feet or 100 feet, if you're in the DMU, for example. If it's in a certain distance of the airport and within this kind of red, pinkish area. It's kind of hard to explain unless there's a specific example to look at. But generally, we don't have an issue because there is also something listed in that overlay district section that says basically any building under 50 feet are exempt from that requirement. And as you may remember, most of the zoning districts are under 50 feet requirement. So there's not too often that we have an issue with this overlay map, but it is something to note. And the other thing I just wanted to note was in my time with the city, I haven't really noticed too much of a desire to go for higher building height requirements. Typically, developers and builders haven't really, mentioned that they needed to go higher or wanted to go higher. However, I think that the city staff has been pretty open to, taking potential, increases of building height to the Plan Commission. For example, the CMU, that was, as I mentioned, amended probably 6 or 7 years ago in response to a couple buildings wanting to go over 50 feet. And so we have gone before and just said, hey, is this realistic in this zoning district? And for some of these zoning districts where multifamily is allowed, this kind of allows for a little bit more flexibility, although we haven't really seen tall multifamily developments go up more than 35, 40 feet, but it would allow for it if the developer wanted to. So just kind of want to note that overall in my time, I haven't had too many people express that the building height requirements were, too restrictive. However, we're always open to, considering changing it if it makes sense. So hopefully that provided a good breakdown. And I'm interested to hear from Franklin if there was anything that he wanted, more information on.
Yeah. There we go. First of all, where is that map on the zoning? Is that in the comprehensive plan?
This map right here?
No, the other one that you showed with all the that one. Is that the one yeah.
Yeah.
Where do I find that? Is that on? Sorry.
Yeah, so this specific map right here is in the comprehensive plan. However, the comprehensive plan was adopted in 2017. So you can find it there. The most up-to-date one is kept on our GIS system. So if you go on our, and I can show you offline how to access that, because there's a couple steps that you have to get to, but it is available on the website to find the different zoning districts throughout the city. We've tried to create guides in the past to help make it pretty easy to navigate. However, I don't recall where that is held. I'd have to look into that.
Yeah, that's okay. So one of my questions is, I mean, obviously this has some sort of historic basis to limit, 100, most of it's below 100 feet except for MR 24. Like, is that based on something? Like that's really my concern is other than MR 24, which is really the key one, but MR 24 seems to have a very limited footprint or place in the city. So was there a reason why they wanted so many, there seemed to be I won't say prejudice, but a desire not to have tall buildings. Was there a reason for that? Was it a structural reason? Was there what? Anything? Rationale?
And
when that was done?
there were a couple.
Yeah.
There were a couple other districts where it is allowed to go up to 100. The MR 24 would be specifically for residential at 100.
Yeah, I'm only interested in
residential. To answer your question,
I'm only interested in residential. Okay. Yeah.
To answer your question, I mean, I obviously wasn't here when they first created the zoning districts. I would say that this is pretty standard for most communities, and I think honestly the true answer is to limit density in most of the single family districts, and it wouldn't just be building height that would come into kind of controlling the density. You would be looking at setbacks, building a lot of the coverage. There's a whole bunch of different factors, and I think for the desired density that the city wanted at one point when they created these regulations, that seemed to be the best option is to keep it to 35 feet, which could be a 3-story home. Generally, it's going to be more two stories. I've seen, depending on how the building is constructed, but it seems to be to limit the density as far as I can see, and to kind of have a form of the neighborhood, to not have just, let's say 3 houses at 30 feet high and then 1 at 70 feet and then the rest at 30, where it just kind of creates an inconsistent form. That seems to be kind of the general genesis for most of these requirements, not just in Marshfield, but through all the communities that I've worked with, as well as just nationwide, in terms of why there's building code requirements.
Well, certainly. Yeah, well, certainly doing the zoning in a way which is not disruptive, in a sense of having a neighborhood of bungalows and suddenly something juts up. But I would just like the Plan Commission, gentlemen and Madam Mayor, et cetera, to consider the fact that we're talking a lot about the need for housing in this city. And that also one of the issues, which even you can see on the little aerial map from the last agenda item, is that there's some very, very large lots in this city, lots of grass with a bungalow sitting on them. So there is a housing, I've been told, and I think it's true, a housing shortage issue. And that if in the past there was a desire to limit density, I would propose to the Plan Commission members that maybe that should be reversed. That we need density. We can't, it's very difficult to expand the boundaries of the city. I mean, it can be done, but it's difficult. So one of the ways to address 2 things, one is the housing shortage. Secondly, population base seems to be shrinking. People do want to come in here. They find it difficult to find housing, so they're elsewhere, would be to create places where there's a higher density of housing. And the way that's basically done is through buildings that are a bit higher, you know, than 3 or 4 stories. I mean, most of our apartments in this town are 2, maybe max of 3 stories high. And, you know, maybe the developers, when they developed it, that was all they cared about, and so on and so forth. I would say this would be something which would help our construction industry, maybe help retail sector if we could begin to create higher density, could create a better tax base and so on. So I'm only raising the issue here to the Plan Commission. I'm only raising it, I'm not ready to propose anything, so I don't think neither I nor anyone has enough data. But just as the next agenda item is concerning setbacks and so on, I think that I'd like to propose, I'd like to kind of lobby the rest of the Plan Commission members to give consideration to the fact that we could possibly begin to put some mid-rise buildings into our town, which would have all these beneficial aspects if they were done correctly. That's the main thing here. And I thank you for the presentation here. And that's really helped me to see this, I think, more clearly as well. Thank you very much for that work and presentation to us. And I'll be back with this.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in, I thank you for providing that information, that feedback. I think one of the things that I'm getting from what you're trying to say is, I think what we'd have to do is we'd have to take more of a comprehensive look into it. For example, you mentioned the next item. You know, I think if we were to look at changing the building height, you'd have to look at changing the setbacks. The lot area of the building covers a lot. And also you'd have to maybe consider allowing for additional uses. Like, for example, SR2 through SR6, you're only allowed single family residential for SR2, SR3, SR4. And then in the SR6, you can have single family or 2 flat, which is 1 unit above the other. You know, if you wanted to increase the density, change, you know, some of the zoning requirements, and then, you know, increase the height, you'd almost have to allow for more than 1 unit in the, you know, let's say in SR6. If you want to raise the height, you'd almost have to increase, you know, how many units you could have in that district. So I think certainly depending on which direction, you know, the Plan Commission would want to go, or kind of how you would like to take a look at it, I definitely think that there'd be a lot of other pieces to take into consideration besides just, you know, just the height as a standalone item. So just kind of wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I understand that. So thanks for bringing that out. That's true.
Thank you for that information, Bryce. Yes.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, you know, as we get into the winter, oftentimes we have fewer applications to deal with, and broader topics like that probably are a good opportunity to fit into those agendas. So I think that's worth, and we'll talk more about it on the next agenda item, maybe something like that comprehensive is worth looking at during those winter months.
Yes, John.
Bryce, have you, or Steve, maybe you could chime in too here. Has anybody, a developer in residential real estate, ever expressed a desire to build a mid-rise apartment building that would exceed any of these limits?
Not to my knowledge. I know that there have been some initial discussions about in the UMU district, and yeah, usually the UMU or the DMU, which the DMU allows for, you know, pretty high, so they wouldn't have exceeded it. But the UMU, I've seen a couple times where people originally were considering taller buildings. However, there was other factors that went into them changing their mind. So I would say it's pretty uncommon. Especially, yeah, the MR12. So, and just a little bit of background, the MR12 district, although it would allow for a number of different types of apartments, what we tend to get is more of the garden apartments, garden style apartments. So like the Swiderski, the ones on Heritage Road, where they're not that tall. And that seems to be kind of the product that Marshfield seems to attract in terms of apartments, rather than, you know, the tall on small lots, types of developments. We don't generally get too much interest from developers there. And I don't know if that's because of just how our zoning code is set up where we're deterring that, or if there's just not a big enough market for them, at this time. So I'd say not, I typically haven't, but, that's something that we would certainly, keep our ear out of and inform you guys if we do, if we do hear that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of the question here is is the lack of interest in that sort of building because of our zoning code and they just don't think to ask if there's a way to get a variance on that, or is it that there's no demand for it? I mean, property, like land is relatively cheap here, and like you get out, definitely in the outlying parts of town, it's more plentiful and there's opportunity for development like we've seen with, you mentioned Swiderski or Heritage Drive, but is there any interest in anybody building a 70-foot tall apartment building, like relatively close to downtown? I don't know.
Yeah, and for my part, I'm in my 14th year, but for most of the time I've been here until the last couple of years, the initial inquiries wouldn't have come to me. So it's possible that someone, came forward and said, I'd like to do this project, and someone said, look, that would exceed the height limit. But I'm not aware of any that have gotten very far. But it's an interesting question because, even as we talk about the West 2nd Street redevelopment project, there might be somebody having some idea and asking questions about what density might be possible in that part of downtown or somewhere else. So who knows?
Yes, thank you, Bryce. Wow, that's a lot of information. Thank you for bringing it up also, Franklin. Absolutely. Moving on to number 9, discussion on possible zoning code changes to provide redevelopment options for smaller lots. Presenter, Bryce Hembrook, planner.
Thank you. So this is, I guess, similar to what we had just talked about in kind of asking the question, is there, any desire to kind of relook at our zoning code to allow for some changes that could help with, small developers, small builders. And so we just wanted to put this on the agenda. As Steve had mentioned, the agendas may be getting a little bit, less items on them. And so this allows for us to kind of look into some changes, maybe come back in the next month or have, further discussions. And so one of the things that I've talked with city staff for since I first started in 2017 was, considering whether or not the typical zoning requirements in the SR6 district were really necessary for what they currently are. And I'll kind of go over why, but actually I will go over right now. So the table, as you can see on the screen here, shows that there is a minimum lot area of 6,000 square feet, 40% maximum building coverage a lot. Minimum lot would be 40. And then minimum front, 25 feet. Street side would be 15. And I'll kind of show an example of street side compared to front. Minimum side would be 7.5 and minimum rear would be 25. So I'm just going to give an example of kind of why this conversation started. So the SR6 district, and I'll actually go back here to this map. So towards the downtown area, a lot of these higher density single family / 2-family areas, and it's kind of hard to see too well, but a lot of these areas are zone SR6. And so that was when the city developed pre-automobiles, you wanted to be closer to downtown so you could walk, get to places. And a lot of these were built before the zoning codes were in place. So what you get in these older neighborhoods is a lot of these properties are considered to be non-conforming. And I did a very high-level analysis of 4 different areas within the SR6 and found that at least 50 to 60% of the areas that I looked at had at least one non-conformity. So whether that's a front, like for example here, the front and the side setback are not meeting the current requirements. Here, I think here, and so I won't go into that much detail, but essentially the way that planners and kind of zoning people look at this is if there's areas where over half or it's probably even higher than 60% are not conforming, the question is, should we make any new properties meet the, these new standards of meeting, some of those new subdivision type setback requirements / minimum lot width, or should we have them match, the current existing character of the neighborhood? And so that's kind of the question that we started with, because we kept getting, for example, someone would reach out and say, hey, can I build here? And then just for an example, this would be the front setback, street side, rear, and then the side. And so people would reach out and say, hey, I really want to build on this property. It's, a good location. I want to be closer to the downtown and be able to only have, maybe one car and walk. It could be cheaper. There's already utilities, so I don't have to put in infrastructure, et cetera. These are many of the reasons why they want to, construct, here. And they try to create a design, and it's pretty limited on what you can do, because you have to be 15 feet here, 25 feet here, 7.5 feet here, and then 25 feet here. So you get a pretty minimal building envelope. But when you look at the rest of the neighborhood, these are kind of tightly packed in. And so the question really is it necessary to have these, increased setbacks when the rest of the area does not look like this? And so that's kind of what started that conversation. And then also with talking with zoning administrators now and building inspector, they're talking with local builders and local developers, and they've heard a lot of, I guess I wouldn't say complaints, but they had those issues where they just can't make it work and build on these properties and basically make it pencil out on paper, for the costs and everything. And so I've looked at the properties that they've talked about, and they technically could meet the setbacks. They could meet the building coverage a lot. However, it wasn't what they were proposing. I do think that there's definitely a need, or a desire, I should say, for larger houses, maybe a larger garage, et cetera, than what, these houses were built at. So I think what a lot of the local developers and builders want is for a little bit more flexibility with the setbacks, with the lot width, to allow for a little bit larger of a building. And like I said, they can technically meet the requirements. However, if we have all these vacant properties and nothing is being constructed on there, I think it's time to kind of reassess, do we want to try to have these be developed by, taking a look at the setbacks. And so, I also quickly created this kind of pros and cons, and these are, you could definitely argue certain, points back and forth, but I guess at a very high level, I think most people would say there's an increased privacy with, larger setbacks. If you're 50 feet from the road, you have, a nice yard that you can have in front, then you have a greater separation from your neighbors, from the road. There could be a positive, and you'll notice I have kind of aesthetic appeal and architectural style as pros and cons. It really depends on who you ask and the style, but aesthetic appeal could be a positive for setbacks, managed stormwater runoff, light and air circulation, future development, and utility flexibility, and then fire separation. The big concern when I've talked to the building inspector of, what is the true, from your perspective, what is the true benefit of setbacks? It's to have a fire separation of 10 feet. And so that's where, our current side setback is 7.5 feet. And so you essentially would have 15 feet in between, your neighbor and your house. If the fire code only requires 10, should we consider reducing the setback from 7.5 to 5 feet, which would allow for ultimately, 5 feet more to build with. So you go from essentially building a 24-foot wide house to, almost 30. That seems to be more reasonable for newer families looking for a new house, or, for people trying to downsize, et cetera. Cons, there would be reduced usable land. So for example here, because of the setbacks the way that they are, the building envelope is, a relatively small rectangle, where if you, reduce the setbacks or reduce the setbacks, then you would have a little bit more room to work with to build a larger house. Another thing to consider too is that I showed here, the building coverage of the lot is 40%. So the building coverage of the lot basically talks about what is the total square footage of all principal and accessory structures on the property. So for example, this house right here, just by, the naked eye, it looks like this is exceeding that 40% because it looks like it's, probably 45 to 50% of the lot is covered by a building. And that's another thing that we've seen in a lot of these areas are these smaller lots. And there are examples throughout the city of these smaller lots that are technically meeting code, but they're very hard to build because of the current setbacks. And so these are kind of the things that we're hearing from developers and builders. Another thing, increased development costs. So if you are creating a new subdivision, the wider the lot width has to be, the more the increase in setbacks, the higher the utility costs could be, the street construction costs would be. There are design and building area constraints, impact on density. This is one thing that we talked about in the last item. And then architectural style. So one of the examples that I use is in my neighborhood, I have a couple neighbors that have a garage that is pretty much the only thing you see from the front because it basically hides the rest of the house because they wanted a two-car garage. And so you have kind of a snout, garage, which I think a lot of people would argue that that's not the desired architectural style that they want for a neighborhood. Now, some people, like my neighbors would disagree with that. But so I think depending on who you ask, setbacks can have a negative impact on the overall, urban design of the neighborhood. Some of the other things, increased infrastructure and new home construction costs. So I think one of the things the city has realized over the past 5 years or so is that it is very expensive for new subdivisions to go in, and that's why some of our new housing starts are pretty low, and infrastructure seems to continue to go up, pretty drastically. And so by focusing on what we call infill development, you can basically build new homes in areas that already have street, have utilities, they just have to hook up, and are already connected by, whether it's sidewalks or, other services. So I didn't have a good example here, but if you pretend that this house is vacant, these two properties are built, and someone wanted to build a brand new house on here, this would, technically at a high level be considered infill development. And that's something that we push in our comprehensive plan as a way to say, hey, we have vacant land with, existing utilities and infrastructure. Let's try to build on that. So that's something we've always tried to push, but we haven't really been able to, help local builders and developers to at this time. We've also thought about doing like infill development guides to basically give builders and developers like pre-approved floor plans, housing styles that would meet setback requirements. We've thought about doing that, but I think we wanted to do this as a first step to kind of say, hey, do we want to reconsider our setback requirements? As I was talking about infill residential development, it offers several benefits. One would be maximizing the use of existing infrastructure, promoting sustainable growth by reducing sprawl in terms of, instead of going into new, old farmland, you can build where there's already a neighborhood. It would revitalize neighborhoods and enhance vibrancy. One of the things that's mentioned in the comp plan and the downtown master plan is that there is a desire and a need for increased population in a close proximity to the downtown in order to help your restaurants, to help your entertainment options, help your grocery store. The more people you have in a close distance, it certainly would help to increase the amount of people that are walking downtown, visiting there and spending their money down there. It supports affordable housing initiatives. And one of the affordable housing is kind of one of those words that, depending on who you ask, they have totally different definitions, understanding of it. And I guess it's more workforce housing of, what is the average person in Marshfield? What can they afford? And most of these new homes, the average salary would not be able to afford that, where these would hopefully have, these houses would still not be as cheap as they were 5-10 years ago, but they certainly would be cheaper than the alternative. And then enhancing walkability and reducing traffic congestion. I wrote the city wrote the bicycle and pedestrian plan years ago. One of our things that we wanted to promote was, walking and getting downtown. And one of the things we recommended was to encourage for more development close to the downtown area, and then reduce the development costs. I promise I'm wrapping up here shortly. Housing affordability report. So every municipality in Wisconsin over 10,000 has to create a housing affordability report each year to kind of give a update for how affordable housing is in the city. And also they have to come up with a requirement of proving that they can reduce the cost for the lot. They have to basically come up with a reduction in cost and reduction in approval time of 20%. And so what we did in the past was we looked at the lot size. So if you were to reduce the required lot size, the value of the lot would be, 21.7% cheaper if you went from, and I use TR6, not SR6. It's currently 6,000 square feet. If you went to a minimum lot size of 4,700, the overall cost of that lot value would be reduced by 20%. And so that would be if you're purchasing that lot. And those numbers are from 2021. It's not that cheap anymore. I would be willing to bet. But then I also show the lot with the cost reduction in terms of the estimated cost for infrastructure. So at the time of the writing, we said that each lineal foot of roadway with utilities costs roughly $700, and simply reducing the required lot width can have a great impact on reducing these costs. Once again, I think that number 700 has probably increased quite a bit as well. But I showed that at 40 feet for the minimum lot width for SR6, if you were to change that to 32 feet with reduced setbacks, the estimated cost for infrastructure would go down by about 20% as well. And these are very rough numbers, but it just goes to show that there could be a pretty decent impact by just changing the lot width, the setbacks, the building lot coverage of the lot, by relatively minor, minor changes. So that almost covers it. And then just generally, this is a national planning and zoning trend to kind of rethink our setback requirements or lot width requirements. To be completely honest with you, there's a lot of setback requirements in other communities that are pretty arbitrary. And a lot of times it's kind of the status quo of, well, this is what we've had since we adopted the code in the 60s, 70s, we're going to keep using it. And so one of the things that, planners and zoning people do is just kind of pose the question is, should we be reconsidering this? Is this still what we, want to promote? And so I think the discussion for tonight was focused more on the SR6 district, and that is because that is where we hear the most of people, like I said, local builders, local developers that are, probably your neighbors and the people you see out at events. They want to build, and they want to, whether it's building for them, building to sell it to, a family member, or however they want to structure it. It's people that are living in Marshfield that plan to invest in Marshfield. They're not these large companies, and they're really who we're hearing this feedback from of, hey, we'd like you guys to reconsider that to help us out. Another group that has really led this conversation with me was Habitat for Humanity. They've been looking for a number of lots throughout the years of, we'd like to build these houses, and almost every time they've had no luck because a lot of times setbacks, lot width requirements, etc. And so we do hear that feedback quite a bit, and we do take that into account. And so we wanted to focus on the SR6 district first. However, we would be open to considering other changes throughout the city if the Plan Commission wants to. I did want to mention that the SR6 district is generally in existing areas, and so it's pretty. I can't think of any areas where SR6 would be like a new subdivision. So this would be more focused on, like I said, more of that pre-war development style, closer to downtown. If we wanted to consider reducing setbacks and lot width in the newer subdivisions, that's something we can certainly take a look at as well. But like I said, just to get the conversation going, I wanted to present this. And I know I threw a lot out at you and kind of used terms that may not be recognizable. So feel free to ask any questions that you guys may have.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Bryce. This has been talked about in many circles for a lot of years. And if you drive around this town, there are a lot of lots that, they're everywhere all over town. And it makes all the sense in the world. I do understand some people are probably a little concerned about non-conforming lot, but I think with a little ingenuity and I would personally like to see us review all of them, but I do understand SR6 is probably our initial starting point, but the world has changed and costs are up. We need more housing. And I mean, ultimately, we have to look at our possibilities. So I am 100% for reviewing this and coming up with something that we can fill those lots up. I mean, yeah, it makes great sense. Thank you.
I agree with what Mike's saying here. We've got, I think, a big opportunity to really open up ourselves for a lot of additional housing development, especially we're talking, relatively lower cost homes that could be built here. Bryce, do we know from an inventory perspective, like of the vacant lots, how many, like in the entire city, like how many would be tough to build on with current setbacks? And what is the percentage or concentration of those in the SR6?
So I don't have that currently. We could certainly look. I know that in the past, we've identified vacant lots. We've identified vacant lots that are zoned, we've kind of broke them down by the zoning district. That would have been probably 4 or 5 years ago. I would imagine the numbers, I'd imagine that not much has changed. I know that there's been a couple new developments in those areas, but we could probably find roughly, that information. I would say that most of the vacant lots, at least the vacant lots that I've been reached out to about, have been generally more in the SR6. We're talking probably 60, 70%. There's been a couple SR4 districts, people asking about those. I guess they were able to kind of make that work a little bit, but I'd say the two big ones would be SR6 and then SR4 is kind of where I get the most questions for. The other thing with vacant lots too we at one point identified vacant lots that, are developable, and then also vacant lots that are owned and, retained by the adjacent property owners. So for example, I own my house and then I own the lot next to me. And so we identified that to basically show that, just because there are vacant lots doesn't necessarily mean that people are willing to sell. However, with knowing that information, we could inform people, hey, this person owns that. You could just reach out to that property owner, see if they're willing to sell. So I know that we have kind of broken that down in the past. We haven't kept up with it just with, staff turnover and all that, but I'm sure we could try to find that information for you.
Yeah, I do remember when this came up, I don't know, we'll call it 6 years ago. And there was a lot of discussion about those captive lots. There's one across the street from where I live, and yeah, it's a great opportunity for a house to be built, but just it's going to be vacant. But yeah, I can think of one. It's right over here I'm pretty sure it's on 6th here, and it's a really narrow lot. I want to say there was a fire there a good number of years ago, and it hasn't been built on. It seems like a great opportunity. So. Yeah, it sounds like SR6 and maybe look at SR4 while we're at it would be the place to start.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you, Bryce. Great presentation, great analysis of this. And I couldn't agree more with John and Mike on their comments. I talk to the development services staff all the time. I attend their meetings now since they don't have a leader. I've been doing that for a while. I hear from Pat Kilty and others in that body all the time that, we talk about there's no places to develop in the city. There are lots that are buildable. You just have to be creative about what the requirements are. And they would fit in the districts where they're at. They really would. It's not like they're being sore thumbs in other neighborhoods. So I think, a lot of good things have come out of this conversation tonight. I mentioned that we're going into the colder months, which usually produces fewer land use applications. We've identified to look at the height of buildings, smaller lots. And I think we didn't get to it tonight, but John Caprillion, you brought up, revisiting the issue that Jeff Hill brought up about larger lots and what we would allow on those properties.
Yeah.
We have the ones off McMillan, we have the ones in the Lincoln area. So I think these are ripe. We're going to get into items for future agendas here shortly. These are ripe for late fall, early winter in-depth analysis and seeing if there's something we ought to look at perhaps modifying.
would you need a future agenda item request for these, or is this direction enough that we?
I think consensus of this conversation, if those items all sound appropriate, all three of them.
Yeah, I think so too.
You know, Bryce and I talked about the Jeff Hill issue we brought up with the larger lots. I think we're waiting to find out what Jeff himself is going to do. He was looking at some different ideas, but even beyond that property that was talked about last month, the item is out there. We periodically get people looking to develop on larger lots, and we talk about what's acceptable density. So I think we can just take it as a consensus, Mike.
Most agreed. Everyone in agreement? Yes? Sounds great. Okay, and thank you again, Bryce. Wow, a lot of information, but great information. Thank you. And thank you, Franklin, for bringing up the height requirement, because that brought us to the next level. No pun
The next
intended, of
level.
course.
Oh, wow.
Can't help it some days. Okay, number 10, staff updates.
Okay, I got a few things. I'll be fairly quick. First of all, this is an ongoing item, as we all know. We don't have staff, right? We're still looking for community development director and senior planner. We're going to ramp it up right around October 1st now. We took a little break at the recommendation of our consultant, but our goal is to push really hard in the fourth quarter with a new effort, a new strong recruitment effort in both those positions. I did go to the Finance Budget Personnel Committee and get their recommendation tonight. It will go to full council next Tuesday to do another 3-month extension with Cedar Corporation for Josh Miller's services and economic development, and SCH for Bryce's services with the planning side. And those two, Bryce and Josh, have just been amazing blessings through this really difficult 2 years, and we look forward to having them for another quarter, but we also hope to get some staff people here someday soon. Vanderwall, we're looking at maybe a phase 2 of that 2nd Street corridor project, kind of beefed up a little bit by been a really long day. Weinbrenner, I'm thinking of somebody else. Weinbrenner is going to build in the business park now, so that piece, and the council seems to want to look at renovating the old Buffalo building. So if the police station moves and the Weinbrenner building is vacated, that really does open the prospect of seriously doing some renovation on that part of downtown. Denyon Homes is out there building at 21st and Washington area in the Green Acres Estates. They put in 4 foundations so far. They're hoping to have 8 foundations in and be building those homes by the end of fall. Great start for that new development. I think that's all I got.
All right, thank you, Steve. And item 11?
I could add one item.
Sure, go ahead.
Can I add one item? So we had sent the projector sign item that you guys had recommended for approval to the city attorney, and he took a look and he advised to hold off on that for now, to not send it to common council. There is concern with the content-based language that was included in that. And so as of right now, I believe that it's on hold for Steve, myself, and Attorney Wolfgram to kind of talk through, what we can do to try to, limit his concerns, or I guess, reduce his concerns, and to make the code, necessary code amendments to that. One of the other things that was discussed with that is that a lot of our sign code could be interpreted as being content-based, and so we should kind of take an overall look at the rest of the sign code. So I just wanted to inform you guys that we did not put that on the Common Council agenda because of his concerns. And there was a motion, as part of the motion at last month's meeting, it said to go before the city attorney for his review. So just wanted to let you guys know about that.
Yeah, and I need to know, obviously Mike and Lois are hearing it now, but I need to let the council know that they won't see that in the next agenda, that we are pulling back a little bit to get some review of the city attorney. If the ultimate things that come from revamping that projector sign schedule ordinance are minor in nature, it can move forward. If they're more significant, it'll come back to this body. And I will also add to what Bryce was saying about signs. Temporary sign code is something we're looking at it again. There's a lot of things in the temporary sign code that are outdated or confusing. It sounds like we're talking about revamping everything we do here. That's not the intent, but we definitely have a number of projects lined up for the coming months on some of the ordinances and the sign code requirements.
All right, thank you both. Item 11, items for further agendas. Steve, now we'd like to adjourn the meeting.
I have to laugh after we've been talking about the last 5 minutes.
Definitely. Mike adjourns, and who seconds?
Second.
Jake seconds, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.